This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Lamid Hey. We're holding 5 lines from the bottom on Lamid Dalid Amid Beis, as we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the Brisa discussing Shitas Rebbe Yehuda. Well, the learning should be an incredible schos, Refuah Shlema for Gabriel Simcha, Ben Miriam Ahuva, B'Seich Sha'ar Chayle Yisrael. So 5 lines from the bottom on Lamid Dalid Amid Beis. Says the Gemara Gufa. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer. And again, this is going to be a almost quote of the aforementioned Brisa, as sometimes we see that when we re-quote, it's done in a slightly different form. But says the Gemara, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Kois echad haya mimale midam atareves. We have 1 cup of blood, kois echad, that is filled with dam atarevis. So we're sitting on Erev Pesach, and a cup is filled with the dam from many carbon Pesachs. And let's just read Rashi. Rashi over here. No, I'm mistaken. Kais echad. No. Sorry, Rashi over here. Let's continue. So again, the Kayin he scoops up the blood from any carbon Pesachs, and he's going to take it and he's going to pour it Ali Yisayid. So we have this 1 cup that is filled with dam from a tareves of different carbonis, different people's carbonis, Shem yishafich echad mehem. If one of the cups holding the carbon Pesach spilled before it's put on the Mizbeach, Nimsa Shehu Machshiroi. What's going to be? What's going to be is that the other cup, the cup of the Dam Tarayves, the cup with blood from multiple carbon Pesachs, will come and be Machshir if this cup spills. Again, Reuven's cup of Dam spills, so now he's up the creek. But the Kayin would go and he would scoop up all the dam from the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. So now he has a combination of all the dams. So when he does apply that dam in the Mizbeach, he's going to machshir up Reuven, or whoever that Reuven is, dam that's spilled. So Amru Leila Rabbi Yehuda. That was Rabbi Yehuda. Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda 2 lines on the bottom. Bikli, but the blood was never caught in a kli. Meaning, where did this damat haravis come from? As we explained, it came from the floor. The kohen would go and scoop up a taravis of all the dam. Says the Gemara, but wait, there was no Kabbalah on this dam, and therefore ask the Chacham Rabbi Yehuda, how is that going to help at all? Says the Gemara, Mina Yadi. What do you mean? You Chachamim, how do you know that there was no Kabbalah done? And we look at the bottom Rashi over here. Rashi articulates, Minayadi, Rabbanan Shleinis Kabel, Valoy Maisehi, Elasvari Balma, Techayish Lashemanishach Damish Lachamiyam. So how do you know that the dam, there was no Kabbalah that was done? Ella, Shemaloi Niskabel Bikli. Says the Gemara, you're right. Well, the Chachamim are asking Rabbi Yehuda, not bivadai, but maybe Shema, there was no Kabbalah, and therefore, how is it going to help? So we have a kasha in Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is seemingly saying that you could come along, you could take the dam from the floor, and that could help a different kayin a different carbon whose blood spilled. Chachamim are bothered, but maybe there's some dam in there that came from a carbon that did not have Kabbalah. Amar lehen, so Rabbi Yehuda responds, as we turn over to Lamed Hey Amar Aleph, says Rabbi Yehuda, Af ani, I as well, even I, lo yamarti, I never said my din, Ella, Kishaniskabel Bekli, only in a case where there was a Kabbalah, then that's where it says Rabbi Yehuda, I said my din, that it would help pouring the dam now to save a potential mishap if a different carbon fell on the floor. So Rav Yehuda clarifies his din. Ask the Gemara, but wait, where does Rav Yehuda know this? How do we know anytime a kohen would take some dam off the floor, how do you know it was dam that there was Kabbalah done? Maybe it went straight from the animal to the floor, and therefore you're picking a blood that had no Kabbalah. Answers the Gemara, Kehanim's reason. The Kehanim were diligent, they were Zaris, and therefore, Va'avdin Haya Umishtabchin. They were reason, but they do it quickly, and therefore it could spill. So there's no chash that maybe they didn't do Kabbalah, says the Gemara. Avada, the Kabbalah was done. Kahnemer's reason. The concern is that yes, they did Kabbalah, but maybe it fell on the floor, and therefore that's where Rav Yehuda is going to help the story. Asks the Gemara, but it's not all dam nefesh. Ask the Gemara, there's going to be other bloods that are all mixed together. So, says the Gemara, when you go and you scoop off dam from the floor, the bulk of what you're getting is excess blood. So why is that going to help? Answers the Gemara on the fourth line, Lamed Heam and Aleph, Rav Yehuda l'taimei damar, dam atamsis kari tam. Rav Yehuda holds even dam atamsis, even the excess blood, has a din of dam. Titania, as we learned in a brayso, dam atamsis bazhara. Eating dam atamsis is a zhara. It just doesn't have the same level of krisos as consuming dam hanefesh. For Rav Yehuda Imer, it's the same din. Bekaris. According to Rav Yehuda, that's how we'll be able to save the karbanos by scooping the dam from the floor. A lot of that dam is going to be dam tamsis. Says Rav Yehuda has the same status of blood. Says the Gemara, I've Amer Rav Elazar, Moide Rav Yehuda le'inyin kapara. But Rav Elazar taught us Rav Yehuda is Moide klape, the kapara, klape, the atonement, she'inai mechaper, that the dam atamsis will not give the requisite kapara necessary. Says even Rav Yehuda who says that this crease is for consumption, but said Rav Elazar, he's might there's no real kapara. Shenemar, says the Torah, dam shenefesh yeitzeh. It's the dam that the nefesh comes out with it, and therefore, well, kidam hu nefesh, dam shenefesh yeitzeh boy karidam, shein nefesh yeitzeh boy ein karui dam. So says the Gemara, we're back to square one. Why is it going to help taking the dam off the floor of the chutzner of the Beis Hamikdash? It's going to be the bulk dam tamsis, which will not matter up the carbon, and therefore will not help anything. Says the Gemara, Ella, you're right. A new way of learning Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda l'taimei, we're 10 lines down. The first one line is l'taimei, damer ein dam mevatel dam. Rav Yehuda holds dam cannot nullify dam. And therefore, even though the bulk of your dam that you're holding right now might be dam tamsis, it still will help to pour such on the Mizbeach. You look at the first narrow line in Rashi, and Rashi articulates that in dam mevatel dam demin beminai, when you have two of the same min, Rav Yehuda loy batel, Rav Yehuda holds, it's not mevatel one to the other. So therefore, even though the bulk might be dam tamsis and only might be a minority of dam nefesh, it still will help to matter up the carbon. Says the Gemara, Amar lehem, Rav Yehuda. Continues the Gemara, going back to the Brayso, Rav Yehuda said back to the Chachamim, Ledivrechem, according to you, Lama Paikin Azara. Why do they plug up the Azara? We know there was a stream that ran through the Beis Hamikdash, the Amma, and when they shechted the carbon Pesach, they plugged it up so that all the blood would gather, all the blood would stay on the floor of the Chatzar. But says Rav Yehuda the Chachamim, but if you're not going to utilize that dam What are you doing being Paikikin Azara? Answers the Chachamim, Amrulai, Sheva Chula B'nei Aaron. You know what it is? It was done as a praise to the Kohanim, Shehilchu Adar Kuboiseyam Bidam. They would walk into blood up to their knees. But you are right, it doesn't really come to matter up any carbon. Says the Gemara, but wait, Vadam have a chatzitza. It's going to be a chatzitza. We know the Kohanim have to be walking on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. And if they're walking on dam, that should be a chatzitza between the feet of the Kohanim and the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Gemara, no. Lachu v'lavi chatzitza. Titnan. Hadam v'adiyoy v'dvash acholav yiveshin. Chaytzitzin. If any of these liquids are dry, dried blood, ink, honey, milk, then it's a chatzitza. Balachim ein chaytzim is not a chatzitza when it is moist. Ask the Gemara, Vaitar v'akamitavsi manayu. But the clothing of the kohen is going to get dirty. It's going to be stained. Tananim learned in the Mishnah, Psula, that if a kohen does the avodah with dirty clothing, the avodah is possible. Now, if you're going to tell me maybe they picked up their tunic, they picked up their clothing, because the blood was till their knees, they made sure that it didn't get dirty. But we learned in our Raisa, midai, with regard to the kohen of the kohen, the clothing of the kohen has to be midai fitted, kimidasai, has to be perfectly fitted, shal yachsar, shal yoiser, that it shouldn't be a little bit more, it should not be a little bit too less, and therefore, the avodah needed to be done with the kohanim wearing the clothing in the regular manner, fully upon them. Says the Gemara, "Ba'ilachas evarim lekavesh." The case is that it was talking about just walking with the avarim, the lav avodahi. Meaning, says the Gemara, you're right. Be'etzim it should be a chatzitza, but it's not a proper avodah. Just the halacha. Says Gemara, wait, we know that it is. 4 lines from the Mishnah, V'loi, v'atani v'krav ha'koyin is like kol, so elach sevarim lekevesh, that it has a din of an avodah. Answers the Gemara, elabay eitzim lemaracha, to carry the wood for the pyre, the wood for the fire on the mizbeach, lav avoidahi, ulavoidahi chiazli, azli itztabai. Says the Gemara, carrying the wood is not avodah, but ask the Gemara, but after they carried it, their clothing's now dirty. How could they afterwards go and do their avodah? Says the Gemara, Azli ayitzabi, they walked in raised stones. So the Gemara is really concluding they didn't actually get dirty. There was blood everywhere, but they walked on raised stones, so they didn't get themselves filthy. Continue with a new Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hashechet is hazevach, someone performs the shchita, lechol davar shein darke lechol, or lak davar shein darke lahaktir. What's the halacha? The halacha is the carbon is kosher, but Rav Eliezer paisel. So if you did a shchita, or you did a aktara for something which isn't edible, or isn't consumable, I should say, is a machlekes. Continues the Mishnah, lechol davar shedarke lechol aktir davar shedarke laktir. So if it's bachas mikzay is kosher, lechol kichatzi zayis laktir kichatzi zayis kosher. Shein achila v'aktar mitzarfing. The two don't combine. We've had these ideas. Hasheichet is hazevach lechol kizayis minar u'min ha'roitiv min ha'kipa min ha'ailal min ha'tamois min ha'gidim min ha'kranim min ha'tlafim. Any of these items, it's going to be kosher. It's Misham Pigol, Vinaiser, Vitame. You're not over any of those Averais if we're discussing eating any of the aforementioned items, and we will, when we get into the Gemara, explain exactly what each item is. So in shechs a carbon with the das to eat the shlil, or the shalya, the fetus, or the afterbirth, bachotz, then loy pigel. That also doesn't create pigel. Hamoylech is aturin, someone who does malika. Hamoylek, is aturin, malika on a certain type of bird. Lechol beitzeam bachotz, to eat the eggs, bachotz, loy pigel. Cholav hamukdashim, milk that is mukdash, who's in the animal b'shas, b'shchita, ubeitze turin, or the eggs of these doves that are in the birds at the time of the malika, ein chaylev misham pigol, v'neiser v'tamid, these entities are not within the regular rules of pigol, neiser, and tummy. So says the Gemara, let's dive into one of the latter dinim in the Mishnah, which was that to eat the shlil or the shalia does not create pigol. Says the Gemara, right after the Mishnah, beginning of the Gemara, Lamed Amid Aleph, which is about 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Elazar, pigol bezevach nispagel hashalil. If there was pigol about a carbon, the shalil, the fetus, is also pigol. Bashlil. Someone has a machshava zara, someone has a pigol machshava about the fetus, then loy nispagel hazevach. It doesn't work the other way, the carbon does not become pigol. Pigol balal. Someone has a pigol thought about the alal of a bird, then nispagel mayra. Then even the mayra, the crap becomes pigol. But mayra, then nispagel alal. Pigol be'emurim. Someone has a pigol thought with regard to different parts of the carbon they go on the mizbeach and are burnt. Then nispagel aparim. Then the entire bowl becomes pigol, and you can't eat it. Be'parim, but if you had a pigol thought about the par, loy nispagel be'emurim. So says the Gemara. So what do we see from over here? We see that certain parts of the carbon do not create pigol. But once there's a pigol machshav on a different part of the carbon, that even this item becomes aser to eat. So let's bring a right to what we just said. Everyone agree, Rav Shimon Chacham agree that if you had a machshava pigol during the dam avodos about the achila, the consumption, or about the sreifa, the akdara, the burning, then loyas aklum, it doesn't do anything. My love says the Gemara Chishav Emurim. Are we not talking about a case in which the thought was about the Emurim, and that's nispagulu parim, and that's the raya to Rav Elazar just said a moment ago. Says Gemara loy, no raya. As we turn over to Lamed Hey Amid Aleph, why is it no raya? Ha Chishav Emurim nispagulu emarim. Atzman. Says the Gemara, even though when the kohen has a machshava about the meat, it does nothing. But if his machshava was about the emurim, the parts that go on the mizbeach, then indeed those emurim, those parts of the carbon, they would yes become pigol. We had 2 dots, but now we continue right after the 2 dots, which we continue donning up Shitas Rav Elazar. Tashema, Parim ben Israfim, Sivin Israfim, Bayalim ben Mesheukdashu. Bulls that are burned, goats that are burnt. What's the halacha? There is mi'ilah from when they are hukdashu, when they are made hektish. Nishchatu, if they are slaughtered, hochshuli pasal b'tvil yaim. Now they become hochshuli kabel tama for psal yaim, for tvil yaim. U'machosar kipurim. And now as well, there will be tama if someone who is not fully tar touches it, ubelina. And they'll have the dinam of leaving it overnight. So my love, what is the case over here? It says the Gemara 5 lines down. Belinas basar. And therefore, Shmamina, mi good pasli belina, pasli b'machshava. So the Gemara wants to show, just like Shitas Rav Elazar, that even though when you have a machshava about the meat, it will not create pegol. But yet, says Rav Elazar, if you have machshava about the carbonic, yes, create pegol. Says Gemara, Loi, Lina say Murim. No, the Mishnah is talking about leaving it overnight, not necessarily keeping the meat, but not the basar itself. Therefore, there's no raya to anything about the basar. Says the Gemara, but wait, Hamiktani Seifa Kulan Mayilin Behem. What did the Seifa say? The Seifa said they all have a din mi'ilah. Al Beis Hadeshen Ache Yutach HaBasar. There's din mi'ilah on the Beis Hadeshen, where the ashes are until the meat is charred. Mechlal, what's the raya? The Reisha Linas Basar. The raya l'chayr is that the Reisha as well is talking about Linas Basar. And therefore it should be a kash and Rav Elazar. Answers Gemara, no. Midi Arya, Hakidisa, each have the Brisa is talking about its own din. Reisha Murim and Sefer is going to be Basar. So we don't have a raya to Rav Elazar. So says the Gemara, Moisiv Rabba. Rabba comes along. We're 12 lines down. The first line is Rava or Rabba. Akasha. on Rav Elazar. Ve'elu she'ein mefalgin. Says the Brisa, the following items are not pigol. Ve'ein mispaglin. They can't make something else pigol. Tzemer shebareishe kvasim, the wool at the head of the lamb, the seir and the beard or the hair. Shebizkan tayashim, the beards of the tiyashim, the he-goats. V'ar, the hide. V'aroitev akipa v'halal. The ar is the hide, the roitev is the gravy, the sauce that it's in, the kipa is the sediment. Halal is part of the animal. V'amura, the crop of the bird. V'atzamais, and the bones. V'agidim, v'akranim, v'atalafim. Sinews, horns, and hooves. V'ashlil, and the fetus. V'ashliya, and the afterbirth. V'chila, v'amukdashim. Ubeitze, turin, kulan. Loi mifalgim, lo misfalgim. Ve'ein chayav aleim misham, pigol. There's no din of pigol at all. Nicer or nicer ve'tami. V'hamalim and bachotz potter. Because of that, if you bring these up, bachotz outside the Beis Hamikdash, it's still going to be potter. Says the Gemara, my love, what is the case of the Brisa? Loi mifaglin azevach, loi mispalgin machma zevach. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah listed the fetus, the Mishnah, the Shulya, the Mishnah listed the Moria, the crop. So says the Gemara, what does it mean, lo mefalgin hazevach? It means, lo mispaglin machma zevach, that these items will not come pigol if you have a machshava about the carbon. And this is a kasha directly from Rav Elazar taught us. Says the Gemara, lo, no kasha. Lo mefalgin hazevach, lo mispaglin machmas atzman, but not because of the carbon. Yach yadik tani zeva kulun mefalgin, lo mispaglin. Why do you need this case? Says wait, will we go over to the first white line? Excuse me. Why do you need that case at all? Elo, what are you going to have to answer? We argued by limistei naiser, v'tamei tani pegol. Chanami adbar limistei amalev mayem bachotz. Tanav kulam b'fagam l'misagim, but it's not going to be a kasha on Rav Elazar. So says the Gemara, we try to frag up. That didn't work. Bring a raya didn't work. Frag up didn't work. Now we go back to bring a raya. Rav Amar, but this will conclude in the third white line. Afana nami tanina. We learned in the Mishnah. Hasheich les hamukdashim lechol shul bachotz loy pigol. V'amalik is aturim lechol beitzeim bachotz loy pigol. V'hader tani, and then we learned chalav hamukdashim ubeitzei turin eich chayav l'misham pigol daisav v'tamei. From there, we can be medayek. That's davka by the chalav hamukdashim and the beitzei turnin. Hashlov v'shel and the chayr yes chayavim. So alav shema mina kan machos hazeva kan matzmaat. So as we originally answered shema mina, it is a good raya. We'll pick it up from here. V'siyata v'shemaya.